Hi guys, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Design and a Half. Today's Friday and we're gonna make it a little bit lighter than usual, and the reason why is because I'm going to talk a little bit about tools. And I'm gonna talk about tools not in the traditional sense that this is the right tool and this is the right tool and this is the... No, there's no right tools if you think about tooling in terms of UX or UI or design in general. Like, tooling is dependent on your needs, and actually not only on your needs but also on your costs and your budget, if you will. And this is basically one of those topics which is really polarizing in the design industry, just because there's a lot of people that argue towards one specific tool or another. But I'm one of those types of people that don't really get swayed by a specific tool. They are swayed by the potential of the tool and the fact that each tool by itself, each program, each application has a specific use that is different than the rest of them. And I think that's why, basically, if you look at the whole picture of applications that we have and the whole options of applications that we have out there for design, and I think this also could apply just as well for developers or product owners, or basically anyone that is doing anything. This whole line of thinking that I'm proposing is, don't get attached to a tool, get attached to the workflow. Get attached to, solving a problem, not necessarily getting a specific tool, because tools come and go, guys. Like, just think about the fact that up until a few years ago, Photoshop was still huge in terms of design. Now it's sort of fallen behind, and it's mostly used for digital painting. It's used for photo retouching. It's used for 3D mockups and stuff like that. But it's no longer as much used to do UI design, UX design, packaging design, maybe packaging design as well sometimes in nowadays. But there's also specific tools for that. This sort of happened just because we need specialized tools, and this sort of reflects itself into the market and into the sort of abundance of tools that we have out there right now, applications that you can access and use for various purposes. And I think this is quite important just because it basically addresses one of the key factors that the market has and always struggled with, is the fact that basically these applications are always thought about to scale for specific businesses with specific budgets in mind, which had basically pretty huge budgets. But nowadays, like, most of the applications that are out there are actually really affordable, even for smaller companies, and especially for thinking about Sketch, just like what they started to do lately with the fact that they introduced this Sketch Cloud subscription model. This made it really affordable, even for smaller designers who just wanted to dip their toes into the waters of UX and UI and maybe do some other stuff with Sketch aside of those two options to do so, just by getting a subscription for a couple of months, trying it out and see if they actually need it and buy it later on. And I think a lot of applications did the same thing for their business model as well. For example, if you're thinking about Principle was sort of copied Sketch's business model and implemented a similar one, with the mention that they do not have yet any type of subscription. They only use full purchase. However, the pricing is made so that it's pretty accessible still. Like, $120 is still a lot, but considering the fact that you're using it to do prototypes, I think it's a decent price. It's not overly expensive, and if you have a business, that cost can easily be reimbursed and basically dampened in a small amount of time. So whenever you're thinking about tools, you really have to think about what you're building for, and what you're using them for. Basically, you also have to think about the budget that you have, like what's the amount of money that you have at your disposal, because Some companies prefer to give no design specific budget or no tooling specific budgets for teams, and those are usually, and that's also in our current company the case, where basically the budget is controlled by a manager, a product owner, and so on and so forth. We don't have a specific credit card or a visa that we can use for recurrent billing, and we have to basically get us an approval for each application that we buy. Normally, in organizations where design is more established and is more mature, you would have like a design manager that takes care of that, or a team lead that takes care of that bit, and basically that person would take care of the design budget, of the operations budget for that specific team, and they would be the person to talk about those subscriptions, those payments that you have to make for your applications, purchases, and so on. Whereas in these situations where teams are small, usually the manager is the one who's doing this, and in a lot of cases, the problems that I see are more related to time management and the fact that usually that person is really sort of required in a lot of places, and they need to be present in a lot of other meetings, and that makes them more unavailable to you, and that surely presents a problem. But this is exactly why budgeting should be done, if it's possible, budgeting should be done with a credit card, and I basically have a team lead that's taking care of these purchases, so managers don't become bottlenecks. Because in these particular situations, like the one I illustrated before, where you have a manager and so on and so forth, you have a bottleneck situation. Why? Because every decision that has to go through the manager, and that's sort of a problem for you, just because in some situations you're like, dude, I really need to build this prototype fast, because otherwise we might lose this client, and the whole decision hangs on a basically a signature from a manager. And what happens if that person is not present whenever you need them? The deal could fall through. You would not be able to do the prototype. There's tons of things that can go wrong, which is why I really hate this sort of model where teams are not independent and cannot make the purchase decisions by themselves. Obviously, you'd have to have some sort of mechanism in place to have teams be accountable for the purchases that they make, which is absolutely okay. And basically that means that each purchase that sort of goes through should be sort of handled internally. What I mean by that is that ideally what you would like to have is to have basically a team that has their own sort of tooling budget for a specific year, where you have the included tools that are already present, and basically an additional buffer fund that is added on top of that basically gives you some runway to jog with other applications. Say if you're thinking about switching from one application to the other one, you would need to have a little bit of runway, cash and funds to be able to switch from one application to another, so you don't have to resort to situations where one of your designers basically pays out of their pocket to get an application and sort of test it out. Because here's the funny part. In a lot of situations and a lot of applications, the problem is that most of the features that are interesting to you are not sort of locked behind a 7-day trial. They're basically locked behind a paywall, which means that if you want to actually see how the application works, performs, and so on, you have to pay for it. From a design perspective, this is very bad consumer it's very anti-consumer. Whereas for the companies, if you think about it, it's excellent, because what it means is that you are able to convert a lot of people that are using the application, even trials, into active users. And from their perspective, this is pure gold. So most likely you're going to see this happen more and more and more for more applications, not just one. Like not just, I don't know, Sketch or whatever fits into this scenario. And that means that teams also have to adapt to this new reality, and they need to have a little bit of cash and basically additional funds on the side, not only to pay for the subscriptions for the applications they use for the whole year, but also to have some sort of R&D fund where they can tap in and just purchase applications and test them out and see if they are feasible for the workflow improvements that they need and so on. And this is actually the next point I wanted to make. If you're in a team, this is one thing I highly suggest people doing on a sort of repeated basis. Like try to take applications that are currently released and try to test them as early as possible, just to see what's their like pitch, where could they fit into your bag of tools and tricks, and see what the best application scenario could be for that specific app. Because I see a lot of people try to use applications, for example, they try to use Figma for stuff it wasn't intended to be used as, or XD to be used in scenarios it wasn't designed to be used as. And I think this is quite important and it highlights the fact that we, as designers, need to understand the tools better. And this means actually spending time with the tool, seeing its potential, seeing where its application and where its strengths lie, and basically using it into that specific scenario. For example, Adobe XD is basically a pretty poor application, and I'm saying this from a perspective of someone who actually used it for a year long. And I think it's poor because it doesn't cover all of the bases that other applications do. It sort of tries to mimic Sketch in a lot of ways, but it fails to do so. And in addition to that, it uses the UI system that is being used throughout all Adobe applications, which is pretty crap, in my opinion, of course. It's crap because it's cumbersome, it's slow, it has a lot of issues and bugs with regards to how information is rendered on the screen, when it's rendered, and so on and so forth. Plus, it's really not that interoperable with Sketch, which means that if you have one type of workflow and you want to switch to another one, it's actually quite impossible to do. There are a couple of hacks, and probably there's a lot of plugins and scripts that can do a lot of stuff like transition from one to the other, but that's rarely an optimal workflow. You would ideally want something which converts one-to-one. For example, like Figma does it, where you actually upload the sketch file into Figma and it converts it to a Figma file. That's something I could deal with, just because it sort of minimizes the workflow that I have to go through afterwards to clean up those Figma files to be able to use them in my design system. And this is actually the next point I was sort of transitioning into. Make sure that whatever design system you're using or building and whatever tool you're using is fit for the job. Because, for example, if you're using Sketch is a good thing to use just because it's very flexible. Same goes for Figma. Figma is quite popular and there's a lot of options to integrate it with. In this particular case, however, XD is not as good as Figma or Sketch. It's way more rigid in terms of a file format. It's very Adobe specific, and I may be labeled as an XD hater, and I'm assuming that for myself. I have no problem owning up to that thing. As I said, I've worked with it for 1 year, and I felt like it's really not there yet. It's not yet a professional tool that I would actually pay money for to use. No, if you would like to compare it, it's a slightly more evolved version of the InVision Studio. However, InVision Studio is much more similar in terms of workflow to Sketch. It's snappier and it works a little bit better. Plus, it's got that amazing animation suite. Like strictly from a prototyping perspective and from an animation perspective, I believe InVision Studio is far superior to XD in a lot of ways. Plus, it's got the added advantage of integrating with the InVision services, which obviously is a huge bonus. And you also have the plugins and so on. Plus, if you think about it, InVision Studio offers you another advantage that XD doesn't. It basically gives you the option to have one file which is also compatible with Sketch. You can actually open Sketch files within InVision Studio and just use them normally like you would with any Sketch file. This is actually something that's really amazing, and I think it's very underrated for this. However, thinking about how many tools there currently are on the market that can deal with vector graphics and UI design and so on and so forth, I think sort of InVision's role and InVision Studio's role here has diminished quite a lot in the latest couple of months, if you want to, because I haven't seen it being used as much, and to be honest, InVision Studio is that sort of tool, just like Adobe XD, that is okay, but it's not really fit to be used in production just yet. Like, it's not as mature to be used in production. And this is the next point I was trying to sort of get across, is the fact that you have to be really, really careful with the tools that you're picking so that they are really popular. And the reason why is because popularity equals longer support. Longer support means being able to use this tool for a long time. And additionally, popularity also means all sorts of small productivity enhancement and hacks and that sort of thing, like plugins and stuff like that, which is really, really cool. And the problem with InVision Studio is right now is that it's not gaining enough traction, just because there's enough competition on the other side. And to be honest, I think the biggest contenders in the future in terms of what graphics application is going to be more favored, my personal prediction goes for Figma, just because computers are sort of becoming less and less relevant, and I think cloud computing is the future, especially if thinking about how we need to be able to move around a lot, which means having mobility means sacrificing power of computing power. And this also in turn means that in some situations, for example, in my case, I would love to use Linux. Linux is from my perspective way better than Windows or Mac OS ever can be. And added to that is the fact that it's free. I personally love to use Elementary OS just because I think it's one of the best Linux distributions out there for non-tech users. Plus, if you're really into tech users and basically using your console and stuff like that, you can still use Elementary OS just like any other Linux distribution. However, the one thing that they did right, and I think a lot of other Linux distributions could probably copy off of them, is the fact that they opened up a shop. They actually have an application shop similar to the Apple shop, the App Store. Sorry, the Mac App Store. And through this store, they also give developers the option to sell their applications online for other people to buy, which I think is amazing. And I think a lot of other Linux distributions should basically copy and sort of replicate this idea, just because it's really amazing, and basically would drag Linux out of that sort of hobbyist area into the professional area, even for stuff like design and development. Obviously, for developers, this is not an issue, just because most developers already use Linux for quite some time, even system administrators and so on. But I think Linux has the potential to just sort of democratize PC usage in general, just because it could become popular if it would allow people to make money off of it in the classical term, and sort of make it more accessible for people to make money off of it, just like Apple did with the App Store. That sort of was from my point of view, was the major move that Apple could have pulled off to be able to gain traction and make it popular. And I think Linux could benefit from that as well. And this is why I basically believe that going forward, cloud tools or Linux and cloud tools are going to be the norm, even for designers, just because you can get a MacBook or a decent laptop for that has more power, that is more I don't know, fit for the job, if you will, you would not pay as much for the software as you would pay for the hardware, which would be fine because you would have really powerful hardware. You wouldn't actually need the vulnerabilities of Windows. You would just put Linux on top of it, have it configured really well, be sort of guarded from viruses and the likes, and use Figma and other collaboration tools to be able to sort of get your design across, distributed, and so on. Plus the sort of the way it's structured in terms of subscription model is really cool, and I think it scales really well even for smaller designers. So it's really affordable to be able to buy. That's my honest opinion with regards to this. Okay, guys, this was about it about tools. I'm thinking of actually making another video on this topic in the future at some point. But I would really love your input, and I would love for you to guys to tell me if you would love something like that, if you think it would be useful for you. Please leave a comment and share or subscribe, and basically let me know if you like this sort of discussion to be going on further, and if you'd like me to explain how I would see a budget being made for a design team so that it works decently. Also, keep an eye out for a special sort of video that I'm going to be putting together. I actually had an interview with the guys over at UiPath. I applied to one of their jobs. However, to my unpleasant surprise, they tried to pull off a test. However, it was a really, really uninspired type of test and really ill-fitted for UX designers, and that sort of surprised me, just because I was expecting something really well thought out and sort of more geared towards a UX designer. It was very disappointing to see it wasn't the case, but I'm actually going to leave it at that and basically work on the video this weekend, probably next week, and have it up here on the channel once it's finished. Okay, guys, once again, thanks a lot for tuning in. I hoped this helped you in some way. If it did, as I said before, please leave a like or subscribe or share with a friend, whatever you guys want to do. I really appreciate it, and thanks to absolutely each and every one of you who listened to each episode so far, or downloaded, or liked the Facebook page. I think you're really, really cool people, and I'm really grateful to have such amazing followers. It's really cool to be able to see how fast this sort of small idea of mine grew into a mini community in maybe two months time, which is basically nothing if you think about it. It's such a small time frame. Thank you all for all of your support messages and likes and discussions and shares, and I'm actually super grateful for each person that listens to this podcast, and I think you're really cool. Okay, guys, have an amazing rest of the week, sort of weekend, not rest of the week because it's weekend obviously, and hear each other on Monday then. Bye bye, take care.